The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel.
And I'm Yalda Hakim.
And we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
We're on the ground in some of the world's toughest places. Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yalda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
Me, Harriet Harman.
Now, this is part one of our end-of-year box set because we are taking you behind the scenes of the 2024 general election and we're going to uncover what really happened in the rooms that we don't normally get into.
My working assumption is we'll have a general election in the second half of this year, and in the meantime, I've got lots that I want to get on with. No ifs, no buts, these flights are going to Rwanda.
Two emphatic by-election victories for Labour.
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
Are you looking forward to the election? Can you win it? Can you win it? The starting gun on the general election has been fired.
A long-term plan to unlock our pride and our purpose.
By 2027, we will have halved national insurance to 6%.
So I am going to stand in this election.
To the Liberal Democrats who are campaigning in the Lake District, and we have some pictures of their leader, Sured Davy, paddleboarding.
No decision has been taken to bar Diane Abbott.
Having participated in all the British events with British veterans, I returned home before the International Leaders event later in the day. On reflection, that was a mistake, and I apologise.
The Conservatives have said that they can no longer support two of their candidates for the upcoming general election after they're accused of betting.
Who will be standing victorious in Downing Street tomorrow?
The second biggest Labour majority ever.
Shapps, gone. Chalk, gone. Mordaunt, gone. Keegan, gone. Hart, gone. Fraser, gone. Mercer, gone.
The Labour Party has won this general election.
We did it!
So much to unpack there, and we thought we would invite along some very special guests because we want to know exactly what was going on at the heart of Rishi Sunak's government in the number 10 bunker as we went into that general election.
They are two exceptional women, former Tory MPs, and just want to say a little bit about each of them, because I think they're both should-have people. I think Penny Mordaunt should have been leader of the Conservative Party. She would have been much better than most of the ones they dredged up. Also, in terms of should have, you probably should have also been a film star, because you do look like Catherine Deneuve.
Wow. It's not just Penny we've got, is it?
No, we've not just got Penny Mordaunt, but we've got Gillian Keegan, who's always baffled me because in terms of should have, Gillian, as well as being unspeakably glamorous, she should have been Labour. There she was, a girl from Knowsley.
As I said to you before, I think I'm about the only Conservative that did come out of Knowsley, so...
Welcome, Penny. Welcome, Gillian. It's great to have you on. And also, for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to use Harriet as the Labour voice here because, I mean, you always are the Labour voice, but the point is you were actually campaigning for Labour during the election. So you're going to take us behind the scenes because I can tell you all that Harriet has the best WhatsApps I've ever seen. Well, not seen, she won't show them to me. But she is so plugged in, it's slightly terrifying. In a good way.
We will give the country what it so sorely needs and yet too often has been denied. A government prepared to make long-term decisions so that we can build a brighter future for everyone. Be in no doubt, it is time for a change, and we are it. Thank you.
Now, I know that technically is October 2023, not election year of 2024, but it's kind of this beginning of the story, isn't it, of the election coming down the tracks. And it was Rishi Sunak's speech at party conference in which he presented himself as the change candidate. Were you in the hall? Do you remember that speech? What was the mood at the time?
I was actually behind the scenes because I'd done a speech before, which was aimed at demoralised troops and trying to get them pepped up and able to campaign. So I did my stand up and fight routine, stand up and fight.
We've got the clip of that. Should we play it?
Conservatives at home, this is for you.
It still applies.
It still applies.
Stand up and fight, because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights...
I'd just done that, so I was fatigued behind the set and was watching Rishi's speech from tucked behind there. And I think he recognised, the nation needed that. But you can't just say these things. You have to demonstrate that you're able to deliver them. And that's where that political narrative fell apart. The narrative on immigration in Rwanda, similarly, it wasn't a political strategy that was going to work. And if he'd done he did so much work on things like AI, for example, he did that big international conference. If he'd taken that and said, and this is what it means for your GP appointment in a couple of years' time. This is what it means for your experience of healthcare, which is what Trump is doing in the US now and what Argentina's been doing and what Singapore has done before. That's where he needed to go with it, but he didn't. What I had to provide was the negative. This is what we're fighting against. This is what it will come to pass. This is what they've said they're going to do. I was talking to an audience that were really disappointed with how the parliamentary party had behaved over the years, that we hadn't done things that they wanted us to do, that we hadn't been the party of business for a long time, all those disappointments. People took the mickey out of it, but they remembered it.
Looking back on that speech at conference, I remember, I think there were 3 policies he announced. One was the smoking ban. There was reform on A-levels.
Yes.
And then there was scrapping HS2. And this was the change narrative. Was this the fundamental difficulty of Rishi Sunak and the reset that never really happened because he had to disavow the past to be the change candidate? You at the time were the education secretary. What were you making of it all?
In one way, he was the change candidate, right? He was very different from Liz Truss and he was also quite different from Boris Johnson. So he was a different person. But I do think it's very difficult to do that without saying this is what went wrong, this is where we got it wrong. And I personally would have done that. I never really understood. I know you're supposed to not do it. I would have just, been a little bit more ruthless, actually.
Was it because he wasn't strong enough?
I think he's just such a nice guy.
It's
I honestly think he's too polite and nice.
Courtesy. Yeah. Actually, the politics of politics is not his bag. He was handed a 23,000 majority in Richmond by William Hague. He was never losing that seat. He's never been in a proper blood and guts, hair pulling, snotters and bloods kind of knife fight in how you campaign. And I just don't think he is the sort of person that would ever shit can what's gone before. And I don't think these are bad things, but I don't think that helps you if you are in one of the toughest electoral fights that you're about to face.
Well, going on to kind of how people feel in, Gillian, around this time I have to play you this clip. You know what it is. This is one of my favourite outtakes of politics ever.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their arse and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
This was
no, Gillian, no.
It's authentic.
I think every woman around the world who works tirelessly for little credit went, Amen to you, Gillian.
It became a meme on TikTok, and I had to get a TikTok account to see what it was. And they had all kinds of women going on saying, "This is how I feel after I've made tea for the kids." And they have,
and then what was it about?
This was about building materials that have been there since the 50s, 60s, 70s, and in 94, we said it's only going to last 30 years. So everybody literally knew this and nobody had done anything about it. So I said, right.
Is it the RAC stuff?
RAC, yeah.
Right, okay.
So we need to get a survey. We need to find out where RAC was. But the advice was don't close the schools, keep them open and then do it on the quiet.
And
I
pray.
said, and I said, I'm not willing to do that because it literally, you can't unknow this stuff. The headlines were 7,000 schools going to close. There was 236 schools. And we sorted every single one of them out. We either rebuilding them now or they were all sorted out and they were all made safe. So I thought they had done an effing good job. And all we were getting was criticism for making what I thought was a really good decision.
But also, as a cabinet minister at this point, you know, you've got the RAC stuff was going on in the schools. That was a problem for the government. You've got the kind of change speech that fell really flat at conference, HS2, cancelling that, pretty controversial. Another of the key focuses was stop the boats. Mm-hmm. It was one of these 5 pledges. And as time went on, it looked less and less doable. In November 2023, the Supreme Court found the government's Rwanda plan was unlawful. What was it like trying to defend that policy?
Well, it was a genuine problem. It was a genuine problem. It's a genuine problem for many countries around the world. And when I was listening to the policy, I thought, you know, is that going to work or not? But you have to do something about it. You can't sit there and stare at this problem. You have to take action. And I think he should have just continued trying to get that working and get other countries as well as more returns agreements.
And Penny, when the Supreme Court found that the Rwanda plan was unlawful, what did you think at that point?
So I think the problem with all of this was not necessarily the technical things that were being done, which were all methodical and sequenced. It was the politics of it. And it was almost like the experiences that Boris went through when he created this, we've got to get Brexit done. We're fighting against, you know, all of this tiny majority, you know, you need to give us the authority. He created a narrative going into that election, which got us a huge majority. And I think that there was some thinking about them trying to do that with this, but it was not a successful political strategy. It was a crazy political strategy. And with Rwanda, which provided a platform for ECHR initiatives to come from one side of the party, a lot of the legislation that Michael Gove was trying to put through as well, the smoking stuff, they were all on fault lines in the party, but with no end result in the plan. So as someone, you know, trying to help the Prime Minister, you're thinking, where is the political strategy in this? Where is he trying to get to? My understanding was that the Home Office had actually got enough people that had exhausted their appeals processes. You know, they had a couple of plane loads of people. Yep. So I think it was possible for them actually to get flights off. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it was like, well, why don't you do that? You know, just get a plane up in the air. It was that sort of the rhetoric combined with the parliamentary party that couldn't see where it was going, and then the lack of practical action that just created this sort of toxic environment.
I do not understand when Rishi took over why that didn't fall away when he became Prime Minister, because it was, for me, it was always a pup. Like, punters aren't stupid. The idea that the best way to spend £400 million of taxpayers' money to reduce migration is to put 100 people on a plane does not work for me, like fundamentally, and it always looked like a gimmick.
You've got to have an alternative, though.
But as a political strategy, the idea that he's focusing on Stop the Boats, which is a policy which showed no sign of working, against a background where a lot of people don't distinguish between illegal and legal migration, and the numbers had gone up, as we now know, to nearly 1 million. It was the oddest political strategy to put at the front of a general election campaign.
I'm interested, though, Penny, in 2 things that you said. Because you said, actually, as a political campaign to sort of lead a charge into an election, that could work as a strategy.
So I think if you were going to stand any chance of winning that election, You had to control the narrative going into it. And it wasn't enough to say, we're the change. You had to demonstrate to people you understood what they were frightened about. So, I mean, Rishi did that well on cost of living. He didn't go anywhere near healthcare, which was a massive issue for so many people. People were really frightened about, accessing the services that they depend upon. And so there were lots of things that I think he could have done, and it would have played to his strengths.
So if we come back to the Rwanda stuff, because part of my memory of watching the Commons as well, and you're the leader of the Commons in there, and you've got like Robert Jenrick resigning as immigration minister, you've got Suella Braverman that's left a couple of weeks before and all that sort of stuff, and it looked quite chaotic. And it struck me that, was there a point with the party, the parliamentary party, where it became almost ungovernable, where you had that sort of, all those feelings of grief where, oh my God, we're going to lose, therefore we have to ditch our leader. Oh my God, we're going to lose, there's not even a point of ditching our leader. Oh my God, it's only my personal rating within my own constituency that's going to save me, so I must now put clear blue water between myself and the Tory party, and that might be my only life raft. Because I kind of almost saw some members kind of clutching onto these things. How was it being the person sort of in charge of the chamber, if you like?
I saw my job as supporting the King, supporting the Prime Minister, and trying to cheer everyone up on a Thursday morning.
Which you did. It was box office.
And I think, and it's not just parliamentary party, it was our rank and file members as well, that they were just disappointed because they were not proud of what we were doing. Bluntly, that was it. They were not proud of what we were doing. They felt that we weren't really delivering for business. They felt that we weren't really delivering on some of the key promises that had been made, and what we were doing was not good enough.
But I think what had made them feel bad had already happened. It was Partygate. Yeah. It was the mini budget. It was Liz Truss and the lettuce in 7 weeks. They were embarrassed by that. Mm-hmm. And that had all already happened. In a way, we'd kind of used our lives up. And, it's very difficult to come in after all of that. Also, the turmoil, having so many different prime ministers, was also something that they weren't proud of.
The turmoil, and also, Penny, you had run in the summer, and Liz is just the runaway favourite. I remember you coming out to back her, and I was like, okay, it's done. That was in kind of early August. She then completely cocks it all up. Really badly damaged.
She wasn't up to the job.
It exploded so quickly. There must have been some level of recrimination, surely.
I think there was.
At the time, obviously, I've been very critical of the mini budget, and certainly if you looked at what my platform was and what I would have done if I'd been leader, it was not looking like what she did. And in fairness to colleagues, I think it was only the Chancellor and her that had seen what was in it, which is quite normal for budgets. But I think what people and the membership saw in her was someone that could campaign and create a narrative, and that she knew what she wanted to do. People who had backed her had got assurances from her in writing about, not just about what she would do in terms of her economic policy, but who she would have in her team. She said she wanted all the best players on the pitch. And so when she came in and she did not bring the party together, there were just lots of things that she did. She had as well as the negative policies in the mini budget and the speed she was trying to do things at, she didn't provide much for the city. It was just kind of...
If you need to get that in writing, though, that's the clue.
Exactly.
Penny, you talked about Rwanda and the way in which it stoked fault lines in the party. You've had the trust debacle. Rishi Sunak has become Prime Minister by a coronation. You were, again, very close to challenging, but in the end it was stitched up, really, wasn't it, by the parliamentary party that did not want another protracted leadership race. Penny's just talked about the way in which some of the decisions Sunak was taking was stoking divisions in the party. So on Rwanda, it kind of provokes the row about should the party leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Smoking ban provokes a row between the libertarians.
The nanny state,
Right. So all of these fault lines are being exacerbated and prized at and inflamed, right? But also, isn't it true at this point, the party is pretty bloody ungovernable, right? So you've got Rishi Sunak's in, Braverman, Jenrick's on manoeuvres. You guys are actually, you and Penny are in there just trying to get on with it.
I've been in since 2017, and I would say it's felt like that pretty much a lot because we had to deal with Brexit, and that again led to opportunism, and you could see people resigning or taking certain positions. And I was thinking, you haven't even read that withdrawal agreement. You're taking a position because you think it's politically expedient, which was a big lesson for me because I am not really that political. I'm just somebody who's quite practical and want to serve. Then we had the Great Resignation, which you and I did not resign. I'm like, who's supposed to be running this country? Literally, we're in jobs. I was doing mental health and social care, trying to do the social care reforms. These things have to be done. You can't just walk out. So I take a very different view, but it is clear that you can see when those things are happening. And resignations are a trigger point for someone to say, this is my differentiation. When we next go to the members, this is what I'm going to say.
We've got to kind of the end of 2023. We're about to go into 2024. It is sulphurous on the Conservative benches, I think it's fair to say. And Rishi Sunak is doing his best, but there's many people within his own party that want him beat at this point, regardless of what he does, and they are on manoeuvres. We're going to come back to that. We're also going to come back to Harriet, who meanwhile is in the sort of warm bath of Labour discipline.
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel.
And I'm Yalda Hakim.
And we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
We're on the ground in some of the world's toughest places. Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yalda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.
Right, we are back. It is now the beginning of 2024.
My working assumption is we'll have a general election in the second half of this year. And in the meantime, I've got lots that I want to get on with.
The second half of this year, we spent as journalists the first half of the year guessing, endless guessing about when would the election be? What did the second half of the year mean? Would there be a leadership challenge after the May elections? On and on it went. But Harriet, let me bring you in. What was going on at Labour at this point? You presumably had to be ready.
Well, absolutely. Because we didn't know when it was going to be and we weren't going to be in control of when it was called, we knew we had to be ready. But Keir Starmer had, since 2019, with David Evans as General Secretary, had been building the party from the absolute bottom up because it had been more or less razed to the ground organisationally by Jeremy Corbyn as well as politically. So there was work that had been gone on, and we just knew we had to be ready. So if Rishi Sunak had called the election in 2023, we would have been ready with our finances, with our digital strategy, with our candidates, with our organisation, with our political lines of argument. And it was paradoxical that when the election was called, it seemed to me that the Conservatives who had called the election were not ready, whereas we were absolutely ready to go. And within 30 minutes of that election being called, in every single one of our battleground seats, we had teams of organisers out with their bespoke campaign material ready to go.
It's the beginning of 2024. You're looking at the polls. The Conservatives are really, really badly behind at this point. Did you think, he's going to call an election the first quarter of the year?
I think there had been a lot of political madness going on all round. So the idea of predicting what they would sensibly do was absolutely not on.
Given up.
But I think there was no sunny uplands for Labour because you never feel like you're in the sunny uplands when you're in opposition and you've got a government that's got nearly an 80 majority. So we weren't taking anything for granted, rightly, because we'd been losing elections for 14 years.
Penny, I need to ask you about this because there was talk of a plot to get Rishi gone just before an election and unite behind you. How much of that was real? How much of that was a fever dream?
Briefing was bonkers throughout that time. The only thing you can do in that, because if you're in danger of sort of fueling stories if you issue a lot of public statements. I mean, I did say at the dispatch box, I read that I'm about to be installed like a new boiler.
I think you should make it clear, Penny, whether or not this was the case that you were planning secretly to do it, or whether it was your enemies.
I think there were two things going on. I mean, all you can do is reassure the Prime Minister, but I think there were two things. There were a lot of colleagues who were worried and they were kind of looking for something to happen. And if they came to see me, my message to them is, look, how do you think another contest is going to help? The only thing we can do is do what the public want us to do, is to work as a team and deliver for them. That's what we have to do. And then there were some other colleagues that came and threatened me to say, if you don't do this, we'll destroy you.
Who was that?
I'm not gonna say.
What do you mean they
threatened?
But
so people they tried to blackmail you into doing it.
Yeah, so they came and they said, you need to do this, and you need to have the following people in the following roles, and it's a big mistake to try and threaten me, by the way.
Why did they want you to do that? Were they using you as a kind of stalking horse?
They didn't like, the players on the board, and they'd like them changed, please. It was just a kind of ludicrous way of behaving, and I was very angry about it.
So lots of stuff was appearing in the papers saying you were about to topple Rishi
people
Sunak.
Were briefing, and I was just trying to reassure colleagues and just say, look, this is the only game in town. We just have to make the best of it. And then with the Prime Minister, I was trying to do things to reassure him.
Did he ask you then?
No, he didn't. And I hope that was, that he understood it was not the case. And I'd been doing things to really try and help him. I mean, before he actually called the election, I obviously didn't know he was going to do that. I went to him and I said, look, you're probably wondering why you're working so hard and you're not making the progress you need. And it's because you're the most under-resourced Prime Minister in our history. He got a very loyal, keen team, but not huge campaign experience. So I said, you're looking around Britain and you don't have other options. But actually, there are options. And I'd got a list together of really high caliber campaign operatives in the US who would not work for Trump. So they had time on their hands. I mean, really high profile people. And I said, they're all prepared to come and work for you. Here's a list. You just have to say, we'll sort it all out for you. So you're trying to sort of do everything you can.
But he didn't take the advice.
He didn't. But I've been doing various things like that. And so I think he knew I was trying to keep the show on the road.
I had no idea all this went on, and most of the public won't. And when I can now no longer read a newspaper the same way. I was just a normal person who used to read the news. Now I'm like, who's planted that?
Yeah.
And it can be anyone. It's not only politicians, it's also staff, it's civil servants as well.
I'm afraid it's our side as well. The idea that you actually accuse somebody of running for leader in order to stop them running for leader when they're not even planning to run for leader.
Why were they doing that? Was it presumably because you become Prime Minister, you then have an election, probably lose it, therefore have to stand down, and then they put their candidate in?
I mean, I think there's probably several things going on. They didn't like what was happening. They wanted to change. They wanted their people in.
Is this the Kemi Badenoch crew?
I don't think she was involved in it. I genuinely don't think.
But it's her side of things.
So it would be that side of the party. But I mean, again, there was one individual that came to see me. You don't know what's behind it. You don't know who else is involved.
They're normally all cloak and no dagger, actually.
Yeah.
But clearly at the time, the whole Suella Braverman band were trying to oust the Prime Minister, and they were quite nakedly trying to do that. She'd quit cabinet. Do you remember all the damaging opinion pieces she was writing? The letter. But what was interesting about all of that was, in the end, Suella Braverman did not actually become the candidate of the right for the last leadership election. Actually, Robert Jenrick, who again resigned with his own ambitions, outmaneuvered her. But we're in the new year. There's all this talk about should Rishi Sunak be ousted, and talks of Tory plots lots of your colleagues were saying to me, this is absolutely nuts. This is like the public have had enough of us changing the Prime Minister.
You didn't need a focus group for that. I mean, literally anyone would have told you that. I mean, we'd used all our lives on that.
But this is now the run-up to the election that gets called, and caught a lot of us actually by surprise, but the mood was terrible.
Today, the Supreme Court has judged that the Rwanda policy requires a set of changes in order to be lawful.
Theresa May has told her local newspaper that she will not be standing in the next general election.
Dominic Raab will stand down as an MP at the next election.
Michael Gove has announced he will not stand for re-election.
Another by-election.
Yeah.
Worried?
Can I also warmly welcome the new Labour MP for Dover to these benches?
If you were coming up with a plot line of all the things that could go wrong, this was and some. I mean, literally, there was so many things that
I had a list on my wall of all the Tory MPs who announced they were standing down, and each day we would add to it, and then there would be another, and we thought we're going to get to 100, and what they're signalling is we're done.
Did it make you feel more confident, though?
Absolutely, because I remembered the same happened before 1997, and once your own side are turning their backs and saying it's hopeless, you know, as I say, we weren't complacent because we were pathologically nervous, having lost so many elections, but the signs were there.
Penny, I mean, was there a point in all of that and the turmoil and Natalie Elphicke defecting and all that sort of stuff where you thought, Jesus, this is worse than I thought?
No. It was hard work. I mean, actually, my day is... Sympathy, please. My day was largely spent trying to stop bad things happening. Part of my job, as well as putting through the big bills, there's hundreds of SIs. I mean, hundreds and hundreds a day that come before me.
So explain what they are.
So this is like little pieces of legislation that don't go through the big processes you see in Parliament. Statutory instruments.
You pass it just becomes law.
It just becomes law after a certain period of time. And I had to go through them all because there was some insane things in there. So one of them was relaxing rules around HMOs to enable us to house more asylum seekers. So getting people out of hotels is obviously a mission. Putting them into HMOs is not a good idea. Yes, housing in multiple occupation, and basically taking family housing stock and turning them into 7 bedrooms. But the one that would have made not just an episode, but an entire series of Yes Minister was the idea from the DVLA. There was a sort of backlog on people taking their driving tests. So brilliant idea. We're going to make it harder for people to pass their driving tests. And funnily enough, they went out to consultation, and it was sort of 90% of people consulted said, this is a stupid idea, but we're going to press on anyway. And so I thought, right, I'm not doing this. We are never going to pass this. Do not allow this statutory instrument to pass. And I actually had the transport officials in to explain to me face to face why this was a really good idea. I mean, that's what I did all day.
Like Atlas holding up the mountain, isn't it? Gillian, what was it like for you? I mean, you'd come in 2017. You're now a cabinet minister. You've been a businesswoman until your mid-40s.
Yeah.
Did it feel like you were on a sinking ship? What were the worst bits at that time for you?
I'm not that kind of person, so I'm always keep going until you're told not to. There's been huge boundary changes which had affected quite a lot of seats, mine in particular. So I'd lost all my lovely villages and I'd got a lot more coast, which usually wouldn't be a problem apart from there was a big sewage campaign. So it was just all of these things were happening. But there's nothing you can do about it. So, you just get out, put your tin hat on and go and explain to the British public why you think, it will be a mistake and Labour will raise your taxes.
At this point, are you thinking, I've only just bloody got in and I'm probably going to lose my seat?
I knew it was 50-50. My seat was very different from Penny's. It was like an hour and a half from one side to the other. Mm-hmm. So, and I'd done quite a lot of elections. But my sort of equation was different. I'd done 30 years in business. I was already secure. I didn't need to go into politics. I did it genuinely for the right reasons. And I already felt
Had people stopped listening, though? Because that's the thing, you go out and explain what the government's trying to do. But was there a point at which it felt different to 2019 and 2017 and 2015?
I was in one particular conversation and I'd saved a special educational needs school, a school, and we'd made it into a special educational needs. And this woman had a kid with SEND, and I met the little boy before and I saw him. And she'd gone on, oh, you're so great, you've saved this school, you got these 3 schools, blah, blah, blah. It's made a life-changing difference to my kid. You're going to vote for me? No, because I need to send them a message in Westminster because I'm really fed up of. And they always had a reason. fed up of this.
Unlike many others, you two stayed on the sinking ship. You'd promised your electors when you got elected for Parliament that you would work for them for a period of those years. When you got appointed to your ministerial office, you took the view that you would do a ministerial job until such time as it was not possible to do it anymore. And that is obviously the right thing to do, isn't it?
Yes.
And how annoying all those other people who are looking over their shoulder, thinking I'm going to get out ahead in order I can get a job because we're all going down. At least you stuck on the sinking ship. And that, it's
stand up and fight. Stand up and fight.
And just to finish that off, I went to become a political journalist in 2010. So at the beginning of the coalition years with Cameron. And I was, as a journalist, all of these Conservative MPs that have become cabinet ministers, very senior people in your party that I had known for over a decade, it was a really strange time because suddenly all your contacts, people that you went to, that you did dealings with, one by one, they're all leaving. And it felt actually for me, I thought we're on the cusp of a big change here because it felt like the closing of a chapter. And it was a strange time, wasn't it? It was a weird time. And you must have felt, Harriet, like you were on the cusp of a new beginning.
We did, but we weren't taking anything for granted because we had lost so many times before and you never know what event might happen.
Okay, well, look, I think that is a good place to leave it. We're going to have the rest of the story in the next episode when we get down to business and the general election. So join us for the second part to hear what happened next.
Spoiler, Labour won.
I couldn't logically think why we would go then.
I said to the King, busy morning.
And I was willing him to just say something. Say, at least I'm not a fair weather politician, or...
They said, well, what are you going to say on D-Day? And I said, well, I'm going to say it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And they said, well, can you just, maybe not say that?
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel.
And I'm Yalda Hakim.
And we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
We're on the ground in some of the world's toughest places. Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yalda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.